there on the box trying to sell. But the reality is, for so many of us and so many people maybe in our lives that we come in contact with or we hear in conversation, God is just kind of like this cliche byword that's like this conversational filler, sometimes this seasonal filler in times in life. And we say things about God that are attributes of God or descriptors of Him, but we don't really get what that means. It's just like something we just insert, just kind of pass from one season to the next, or one conversation topic to the next, or just kind of try to just throw something in there. And our hope in this series is that as each week we go through, we talked about the first week about God being our consuming fire, and we looked at Elijah on Mount Carmel, and we looked at the end of all of that Jesus came as the glory of God to consume the ruined sacrifice, which is our lives. And we looked at a different element last week of God being the breath of life, and we talked about in Ezekiel, in the Valley of Dry Bones, that this is like really one of the only bright spots in the book of Ezekiel. And this week we're going to talk about God as the master gardener and Jesus as the vine. And this comes from a passage in John which we all know, have probably heard about, at least in some sense of conversation, of a topical dialogue. Before we get there, a little confession on my end. This is probably the simplest message that I've ever prepared for, ever been about to deliver, because I'm kind of like, I've been told before I have an addiction to landscaping, and I don't think that's entirely accurate, but it's not entirely inaccurate either. But I was trained, if you will, by a lot of on-the-job training. My last job, I worked for a residential community, and I did a lot of different things for the grounds. And some people that went to school that have careers that are like licensed to the T, from everything from fertilizer to how to prune a bush so that you can't see where they pruned it. I mean, like intense landscaping people, like I learned from them. And so when I read this passage in John, it makes a whole lot of sense to me beyond what we would see from maybe someone who's been just to seminary and never translated that to a golf course. Before we get there, our favorite time of the week is going through free stuff on Craigslist. I said last week that I've been collecting these for about 6 or 8 months in preparation for this series, and so every week we're going to go through 5 or 6 that I've picked out that I like. If you need a pick-me-up at some point during the week, just go to the free tab on Craigslist, and there's a lot of junk, and there's a lot of just lame stuff. Sometimes there's some good stuff, but there's always 1 or 2 things that are hilarious. So we're going to look at a couple here. This one says, Black & Decker blender. Works great, but no top. It says, I have a Black & Decker blender. It works fine, but it does not have the glass top on top of it. No, you have a Black & Decker motor. That is what you have. You do not have a blender. You have a Black & Decker motor. And I've seen more than one of this exact thing, a different product, but they are missing a very vital component to the apparatus. Next one. Beautiful sofa with 6 pillows. I'm going to have to read this to you, because you got to wait to the end on this one, okay? It says, 25 people have called and want this sofa. I've never seen anything like it. I'm giving away a lovely piece of furniture, and people say they're on the way, but then they never show. Okay, so here's the new rules. Brace yourselves. This sofa is going to be on the side of the road. Don't call me. Just come get it. And then they give their address. Actually, the next sentence, actually, I can't lift it. It's sitting on a trailer. You want it, come get it. I'm not even going to offer the phone number because 25 people have called and said they're coming, and no one showed. And they give some more description about where they're at. And then she says this. She said, if you'd like to donate a few dollars for my cats, I'd love to have it to buy them cat food. I have 20 cats. I know why no one's come to pick up your sofa. Next one. Nice load of thick cardboard. Cardboard boxes broken down for free. Should read, come pick up my trash. Next one. I love sofas are the most, if you see a free sofa, just click on it, just for humor. Okay? It says, leather couch, good for just the leather. Again, real brown leather couch has been through hell and a little faded. Originally $2,000 couch. It says, good only if you would like to take the leather sections, and make stuff with it. Because we all know people who cut up leather couches for the leather to make stuff with it. Not really. Next one, office chair. Blue office chair. No back. No wheels. You have an office stump. There are wheels. It just says wheels. No back wheels. And beat up filing cabinet. Still holds files, just beat up a little. Fantastic. Is that the last one? Oh, no, another couch. There's a lot of couches I've collected here. Oh, that's the same one. Okay, I'm sorry. False alarm. 2 couches. Can't get too greedy. So the passage we're going to look at tonight is in John 15, and we're going to read the majority of the passage we're going to look at straight out of the gate, and then we're going to kind of break it down. This is a conversation Jesus is having with his disciples. This is really kind of towards the end of his ministry. And here's what he says in John 15, verse 1. He says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. So he's given God and him both distinct roles in this. He said, he cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. He says, you are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. And some of your translations will have abide instead of remain. He says, I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not remain in me, he is like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up and thrown into the fire and burned. Verse 7. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be given to you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. In verse 9. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. No doubt at some point in life you have at least seen a pair of pruning shears like this. This is what most of us will use to prune, let's just say a rose bush, everybody can kind of get an easy visual of. This is obviously been used a few times. It's got some dirt all over it. The blade is really, it'll cut your finger off, but it'll probably take a few times to get through. And this is about as kind of as low end as you go. Some of you might prune your rose bush with a pair of scissors. That would actually probably be better than these guys. This is an oldie but a goodie. I've been trying to clean this up. This is one of those old school, no plastic on it whatsoever. This was actually came from Amber's grandmother's house, I believe. And before I could get it pulled out of where I had it stored. It rusted up on me a good bit. But if you pick up the two, this one feels like an envelope. This one feels like a brick. Solid metal. But we're going to take two different approaches to kind of looking at how Jesus would be describing to his audience this whole pruning process and kind of some life application from that. I'm going to use the old pair just because they're more fun. So a home gardener, someone who's maybe been in, been in Home Depot a couple times, probably hadn't done a whole lot of training, has seen, grandpappy or grandma out with the hedge trimmers once or twice. This is going to be in their arsenal. You've got the hedge trimmer, which basically all you know to do is you crank it up and then you just start, waylaying on things. You just start mowing stuff down and you'll eventually cut through it. It may, look terrible for a little while, but you'll get the job done. Some of us, like I said, might use scissors to prune. Some of us might use a machete, depending on what we're trying to prune. That's not really pruning, by the way, but if you're a home gardener, you might think that's pruning. Most of the time what you have is this in home gardening. You have some form of blade and you have some form of blunt object. Hedge trimmers, you're going to have the blade and you're going to have these little blocks like this to kind of hold the branches in place. And then you're going to have the blade. Now, a master gardener is not going to have this. A master gardener is going to have two blades instead of one. And the reason a master gardener is going to have two blades, the reason that people who work at places like Augusta National will never carry something like this, they'll carry something that actually has two of these on them, is because it's really for the good of the plant. And here's what happens. You take something that's dull and you cut it. It'll cut. And from a distance, it'll probably look fine. But if you get up close to it and you kind of get your eye right up on it, what you'll see the difference between a master gardener's cut and a home gardener's cut is the master gardener's cut is clean. And the reason it's so important to the master gardener that it be a clean cut is because the cleaner the cut, the less potential there is for disease, insects, infestation. It's all for the benefit of the plant, even though someone looking at it would say it looks less painful for it just to be cut with one blade. It's actually more risky to the plant and the life of the plant for it to be cut with one blade instead of two. Now, the home gardener is going to prune their stuff once or twice a year. And the only reason the home gardener prunes, unless they just want to get out of the house, is because they're just kind of trying to get the bush to shape up. Like they just want it to take, occupy this amount of space, and that's basically all I care about. When you start occupying a little more space, I'm going to cut you back. I just want you I want you to kind of take this form, fit this mold, and that's about it. You only want your roses to get so big. You only want your forsythia or your evergreens or whatever it is. You only want them to get them so big. And then you start whacking them. You just start cutting them down, get them in shape. Now, the master gardener prunes for a lot more reasons. He does prune for shape. There is a certain purpose for having a screening area or something that you're growing to take up a certain amount of space. But he doesn't prune it once or twice a year. He'll prune it on a regular basis, and he'll prune it more heavily at certain times of year, like in the winter versus in the summer, because he understands how that plant should grow, and he understands when it's stressful for the plant to be pruned and when it's not stressful for the plant to be pruned. And he prunes it actually for the health of the plant, not just to reduce stress, but so that it produces more fruit. And sometimes that fruit is in the shape of flowers, like on a rose, and sometimes that fruit is maybe a blueberry or a pear or something like that. But the strategy of the master gardener is always pruning to produce more fruit. Sometimes it's flowers, sometimes it's actual fruit, but it's always strategic. And there's always function. There's always function because the branches have a purpose, and the master gardener can see a branch. I've done it enough, I can look at your landscaping and know if anybody has any attention to their landscaping, even if it's a good, nice neighborhood landscaping. And here's a couple things that the master gardener will look at. The master gardener is going to look at, first and foremost, are there any branches that are growing, pointing to the ground? If there are branches that start growing and they point to the ground, they serve no purpose to the plant. They are wasted effort. They are a wasted source of energy. Because what happens is as the branches grow out, sometimes you have spouts that'll start growing down. And instead of the plant using that energy, the plant can't control it. Instead of it using that energy to do something that's fruitless, if he prunes that off, now all of a sudden all the energy that would be going to that is now going to be going to the things that are going to be going out in the direction that the plant was supposed to be going in the first place. The other thing he prunes for is beauty. And this sounds kind of obvious. You prune things to make them more visually appearing, but at the same time you're cutting things off. It's because the master gardener, like I said, he knows when he's supposed to prune in order to bring about the most beauty in the future. Now, one of the things, which is kind of a secret, and I'll tell you this, if you have a rose bush, you can make your rose bush look twice as good as it did this year, next year, by doing this one simple thing. Is a master gardener will look at a rose bush, and he'll assess the growth on the outside compared to the growth on the inside. Because for the beauty of the plant, the growth on the inside can be a lot of wasted effort for two reasons. One, there's not room to grow, and two, there's not enough sunlight. And so what happens is you look at, and this is a good way to get your arm scraped up a little bit, but you look at the stalks that are coming up through the plant and what is supplying the most amount of energy for the plant to bloom, to produce fruit, to flower. And you look at how many of those things are pointed in towards the center. And you just start cutting. You don't cut them all off because there needs to be some growth on the inside. But if all the growth is concentrated, if you just go around the rose bush with hedge trimmers and you're just cutting all the stuff on the outside and you're letting all the stuff on the inside grow, you stress the plant out because it's trying to take all its energy resources, and all the mature growth is on the inside, but there's none of it on the outside. And we know people like this. And some of us may be those people. And Jesus says in this passage that we are to be pruned. And as we're pruned by God, God does things the way a master gardener would, not a home gardener. And what we see sometimes in our lives and what we see in the lives of people around us is we spend a whole lot of time maybe listening to sermons, maybe reading books, maybe studying, but we never change how we interact with people. We never change how we relate to people. We never change our pattern of conversation so that the pruning that was done for that reason can take the beauty and the fullness for which that pruning was done to begin with. We go through Bible studies and we listen to sermons about evangelism, but then we never share our faith with anyone, and we kind of had this thought that we're just going to see, how different our lives can look to others, and then all of a sudden, then somebody's just going to come up to us, and they're going to say, "Why are you so different?" And you're just going to be like, Jesus, ta-da! Like, how often does that happen? Like, once every 5 years, maybe? Like, that's not why God prunes us, so we can bloom for 5 seconds once every 5 years. And so we look at this passage here, and Jesus is saying, look, I'm the vine. Like, I'm the deal of the plant. You're the branch. You're what's supposed to be growing out from me into the world to be beautiful, to be pruned so that you'll produce more fruit. I didn't bring this vine up, this bush, so that you guys could just all grow in together. And everybody can kind of be looking at each other with their flowers, but like, oh, your flower's so nice. No, yours is. No, I love yours. And we see this in our churches. We can see this in our small groups, where we have vastly different conversations with people inside than we do people outside. And the whole purpose of the Master Gardener's pruning is the outside. That's the purpose of the plant. And we look at short, succinct, but so like pointed passages like this, and we're like, okay, what's God's purpose here? God's overarching purpose, verse 8. He says, "This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples." Overarching purpose, God's glory comes from you bearing fruit, which comes from you being my disciples. It's a systematic order of purpose there. God's purpose for us in that is not simply to be disciples. It's not simply to bear fruit, because those things are to give God glory. Our purpose is in verse 2. It says, "He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. Well, every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful." You can take a branch on one side of a plant, and you can take a branch on the other side of the plant, and simply by pruning, you can make one side a sight to be seen, while the other side is nothing special to look at. And it's the same plant. God's whole purpose for us in this is so that we will bear much fruit. Son, do you have a pad? I didn't ask you that. I have a rose bush, several rose bushes at home. I like to do gifts that are practical. Amber can tell you one of my gifts to her was some blinds in our dining room. She was very excited about them. She happened to be in the dining room for about an hour before she noticed them. But Blake and Chandler didn't either, so it's like staring at the blinds like they're brand new and they're totally different and nobody could see them. I literally had them staring at the wall and they could not see the new blinds. But I got her for Valentine's Day last year some roses, and it's kind of the flower that keeps on giving. So it's a perpetual Valentine's Day present. But the problem with this one was I liked the location of where I planted it, but it didn't. And here's what happened. There was bad soil. It was on a hillside, so it didn't get a lot of water holding there. And it was under a tree, so it didn't get a lot of sunlight. And the result of that rose, while it came out and it bloomed for a little while and it looked nice, the problem was its roots couldn't get enough nutrients. Its leaves couldn't get enough sunlight, and it couldn't hold enough water. And what you get in a plant when you have those conditions is a slow, stressful death. Slowly, the leaves started taking out symptoms of stress, and they started yellowing, and they started becoming, the more a plant is stressed, the more prone it is to being attacked by insects and disease and fungus. And it started to die slowly to the point that some of the main trunks of this rose started turning like brown and then like kind of black. And it was like, I was treating it with stuff, and I was doing all the things that I could while it was there in its place. And it finally got to the point that I said, I'm going to lose this if I don't move it. And I literally had to take it with a shovel and uproot it and take it somewhere else and put it in some good soil and water it, and it had full sunlight, and it's like reviving. And I kept taking, some chemicals and some nutrients and spraying it on there and making sure that it had everything it needed to do what it was supposed to do. And some of us may be exactly there. We're in a place in life where the best thing for us may be to be uprooted. And sometimes it's the surroundings we're in, and sometimes it's the people we hang out with. Sometimes it's our own family members. Sometimes it is the places we go at night, or what we do on our weekends, or where we hang out with, or who we hang out with. And some of us, the best thing that can happen for us is not only for us to be uprooted, but for us to be pruned way back. Way back. When I took this plant out, it had some like nasty stuff growing on it. And I cut it back to where I bought it in February, March. I don't remember exactly when I bought it. I said it was Valentine's Day. I think it was Valentine's Day. But I cut the thing so hard that it was like just these stalks. And that was how I bought it, which makes it sound much less romantic. But it had a nice picture on it. And I cut it back, and some of us, that may be the best thing for us, to return to when we first got hungry for God. When we first came to that place and start doing the things that we did then, and start going the places we did then, and start having the same habits. Call it crazy. But when we first sensed Jesus was drawing near to us to do those things again. And as I started caring for this rose that was so just dying and deformed and ugly, the black started going away. And the green started coming back. And then the buds started coming out. And now the leaves are out. And it's like taking shape as a rose bush again. And Jesus follows verse 9 of John 15 with verse 10. And he says this, if you obey my commands, you will remain in my love as I have obeyed my Father's commands and remain in his love. And that sounds just so wonderful until you realize what is happening when he says this. Because when he says this is in the context of the last conversation he will ever have with his disciples. John 14, 15, which we're in, 16, and 17 are one long conversation he's having with his disciples. And that's right before the mob comes to get him. This is Jesus' last conversation with his disciples, and he's saying, I have obeyed my Father's commands. I've remained in his love, and they're about to murder me. And he goes from here, chapter 15 and 16, and then he prays, verse 17, and we covered this in our Sunday school over the summer. He prays for himself, for the good of his disciples, and then he prays for his disciples, and then he prays for us, those who would come after the disciples. And then after he prays for them, it says he finishes praying and he walks across this valley to this place called Gethsemane, and he gets on his face and he starts sweating blood, and the people who are supposed to be praying with him fall asleep. And then one of his best friends, one of his inner circle, comes with a mob, and they take him away and they murder him. And what could potentially be minutes, if not for certain hours before this happens, and Judas has already left. He knows he's coming for him. Jesus says, if you obey my commands, you will remain in my love as I have obeyed, and should I add, am obeying my Father's commands and remain in his love, and they're going to murder me tomorrow. Look, we think that remaining in God's love means everything's going to go great. We're acting obediently. We're following his commands. We're doing what we're supposed to be doing. And the reality is, it got Jesus murdered, but it got Jesus murdered so we didn't have to be. And so as we go into this time of worship, of reflection, of hopefully introspection, of how does this like come to a head with our lives? I mean, some of the obvious questions are, is my life being fruitful? What is my life, my time, my energy? Is my energy growing towards this world, or is my energy growing out to the people who don't know the God that is causing all of this to happen as is? Do I understand that the pruning process is not like a salvation experience, it's a sanctification experience? It's not something that happens, maybe once, maybe, every 5 years. It's something that happens on a regular basis, and it's done for our health to bear more fruit. And as Jesus qualified it, fruit that will last, later in John 15. And do I understand that what may seem to be the most painful in the pruning process may be the more fruitful effort? It may be something that produces more fruit than I could ever imagine. That something that looks like it will hurt more because it has two blades is actually for my good and for the longevity of the fruit. And the reality is, if we are not being pruned, we are not likely remaining in Jesus. We're not abiding in him, because they go hand in hand. So I'm gonna just pray, and then we're gonna go through this last song, and then you're free to leave, you're free to stay. We have these cards if you want to fill out. If you just want this to be something for yourself tonight, this can be just something for yourself. If you want to leave this for us, you can leave this on the back table over there, face down. This is what we call our Wahoo cards. It's just an acronym for Why Are You Here? That's a simple question on the back. We don't really, we have cards in church services that says that you make a decision. Look, we make a decision every week when we go in the grocery store what we're going to buy. That if I could buy a gallon of milk, that doesn't make me a dairy farmer. Okay? This is entering into a process of Jesus binding us to himself and then doing the work that only he can do to bring about the fruit in our lives that brings God glory. So God, I just ask tonight that we would be able to hear your voice through all the noise in our lives, through all the application of your word that needs to happen in each of our lives. God, as I talk about these things, I look at my own life and I just see so many things that are just out of whack, that just need to be pruned. And I know that as much as I try to bend my own branches so that they'll conform the way I think they should, works a whole lot better when you just cut them off. You do the pruning that's necessary. And so we ask that you would do what only you can do tonight. That we would remain in you, that we would bear fruit in our lives that last, and that you would be glorified in that. And we ask this in Jesus' name.